We've seen a government turn its back on those women. But not before, of course, they held placards. Not before, of course, they gave warm words when they felt it was politically expedient.
Starmer and his dishonest gang of cronies got humiliated by Brave MP for their hypocrisy and lies.
There was a man who went on to become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who said that the walls of Westminster are so high. He was inferring that we don't listen to what the public want, nor do we see what it is that they are fighting for and what they believe in.
Labour ministers have betrayed the public's trust, and now they're in chaos as people are demanding accountability.
This government is making you pay for foreigners to have a better life. We're being taken for mugs. Does Labour clearly just hate this country?
They're robbing the Brits dry and shamelessly ruining our future with their sinister agendas, but the public has had enough.
We've seen a government turn its back on those women. But not before, of course, they held placards. Not before, of course, they gave warm words when they felt it was politically expedient to do so.
Starmer and his cronies got absolutely shredded by this MP for betraying the WASPy women and the British public.
With the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who said, and I quote, "All your working life you've got in mind the date on which you can retire and get your pension. And just as you get towards it, the goalposts are moved and you don't get it. And that's a real injustice." Let's look at what the Deputy Prime Minister said. They want their money back, and quite rightly.
Keir Starmer is terrified as his own shameless lies prove just how big of a hypocrite he is.
Let's look at what the Chancellor of the Exchequer said. "Pleasure to speak in the state pension age debate and talk about women who are being treated so badly. The government must listen. #WASPy. The Home Secretary, "I'll keep fighting for a fair deal for WASPy women."
Even Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves chimed in with disgusting levels of dishonesty.
The Defence Secretary, "Labour will correct this historic wrong." And for those of us in Scotland, let's look north of the border. The leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, Anas Sarwar, who said, "Under my leadership, WASPy women will finally receive the justice they deserve."
The entire Labour Party is rotten to its very core, as every Labour minister made a bunch of false promises.
The wider Labour Party in Scotland, who stated, and I quote once again, "Labour will right the historical wrong of pension discrimination by compensating more than 300,000 women in Scotland with an average of £15,000. When Labour wins, Scotland's women win." What happened? A parcel of rogues, indeed.
Labour's promises get exposed to be nothing more than fraud and scams to win over support.
Decided to make a statement right before Parliament broke off to confirm that the government was sorry. To confirm that the government was sorry for the maladministration that took place. That it was going to make sure that the Department for Work and Pensions, which inflicted this wrong upon those women, would never do so again. Lessons would be learned.
A furious backlash is coming towards Labour, but the tone-deaf and delusional Starmer refuses to learn.
Used to back up their decision not to award any compensation, in fact not even to discuss the concept of compensation within this chamber, was based upon data, as I understand it, of just 200 respondents from many years.
The truth is coming out, and now they're trying to weasel their way out with empty apologies.
They then go on to say that there's no money at all, as if they aren't the ones who get to decide how money is spent, as if they aren't the ones who have decided to box themselves in on pretty much every tax lever that possibly...
Nobody's buying the government's shameless excuses as the Brits are fed up with their constant betrayals. It's not that Labour doesn't have the money to spend on the right causes, it's that they're choosing not to. Just look at the dozens of useless and borderline idiotic policies that Labour is pushing instead of helping out the people of this country. They've got all of their priorities wrong and are wasting our taxpayer money in the worst possible ways imaginable. Starmer seems allergic to accountability, but this time he won't be able to avoid it.
None of that was their fault at all. How very dare they? Do they think that the public are zipped up the back? Do they think that the waspy women are not listening and not watching the decisions that they have chosen to take? This, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a defining issue.
Labour seem to think that the British public is stupid, which is why we're seeing constant pathetic attempts at gaslighting and manipulation from them. They're trying to sell us the narrative that none of this is their fault, but one proper look at what's going on behind the scenes reveals that there's a sinister agenda that Labour is trying to push. Starmer has completely betrayed this nation's interest in pursuit of his socialist plans, and we're the ones paying for the consequences.
There was a man who went on to become the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who said that the walls of Westminster are so high. He was inferring that we don't listen to what the public want, nor do we see what it is that they are fighting for and what they believe in. But we know where the public stand on this issue. We know that they believe the waspy women should be given the compensation that they deserve.
There's a deeper issue at the middle of all of this, and it's the bitter truth. Every single Labour minister is tone deaf and delusional to the point where it's harming the nation's interests. This speech alone was enough to send the entire Labour Party into a frenzy as they're afraid of being exposed in front of the entire public. Labour's support ratings are already in the gutter, and after this, they're in total chaos. The British public is tired of these politicians that are out of touch with reality. Sadly, Labour isn't listening as Starmer is still focused on the most idiotic plans that you can imagine.
Brexit in name only. Our politicians have failed us. I can only speak for myself when I say this, but I thought that if we could be in control of our own destiny, we could do a better job than unelected, unremovable, unaccountable, faceless bureaucrats having monthly jollies in Brussels at our expense. What started out as a small collaboration of nations working together towards a united trade-based goal became a costly political behemoth and intruder, an enforcer that no longer represented the views of the individual states within it.
In the latest lists of blunders by the Labour Party, Starmer and his cronies are trying to get closer with the European Union again. In what world do they think that it's a good idea? There are already rumours flying around that Labour wants to rejoin the Union, and it's no surprise considering how their ministers are trying to sabotage everything. Make no mistake, the European Union used to be a good idea, but now it's nothing more than a bunch of rich, out of touch, and tone-deaf people thinking they know better than us.
That the governing parties would see that a British people overwhelmingly voting to leave the EU, a failed project, and get behind it. Instead, we had this to contend with.
To stand here as your candidate for Prime Minister, because a Liberal Democrat government will stop Brexit and build a brighter future.
Starmer and his gang seem to have no idea of how democracy works. They're behaving like third world dictators and completely ignoring what the British public wants. Back when we had a referendum on Brexit, the public decided that we're going to leave. Instead of respecting our wishes and taking advantage of the huge opportunities Brexit has provided us with, Starmer is trying to chain us back with the European Union in a move that is stupid beyond belief. Especially given the fact that Trump is leading America now, Starmer's short-sighted move to get closer with the EU can cost us dearly.
So basically, no one was happy with it. But whether people voted to leave or remain, the overriding response was one of dissatisfaction with the political classes and how they'd royally screwed it up. And online, the backlash of people saying, "I told you so," people like a troll on X complaining that he can't visit his newly renovated house in Italy for longer than 3 months now, or this guy who said that he can't go to his big house in Benidorm.
Nobody was happy with the EU anyway, because all they did was make life even more miserable for us. On top of that, the British public is done with having these selfish idiots for politicians. Labour has betrayed everything they stood for, and Starmer's promises of integrity, transparency and accountability have turned out to be nothing more than a bunch of lies. At this point, Labour doesn't have the spine to reveal what they actually want because they know that the people will completely shut them down.
I voted to leave so wages would rise for those of us who are poorer and so that we could govern ourselves. But sadly, I didn't realise just how bad our politicians would be at it, not taking advantage of the flexibility that Brexit offered and signing very bad deals. Now, Donald Trump is apparently planning to stick big tariffs on the EU, but we are no longer in it, which is great. If Keir and his clan can avoid messing up our relationship with the US, then we might be able to use Brexit as the opportunity it was meant to be.
No matter how you look at it, this deal is a complete disaster for Britain's future for some very obvious reasons. Donald Trump is back in office and he despises Starmer and his idiotic lot of socialists. On top of that, the European Union is about to be hit with some huge tariffs by America, and if Labour keeps on ruining our relationship with Trump, we might get hit by them too. The consequences of that for our economy will be a total disaster no matter how you look at it.
Our politicians need to start working in the country's best interests rather than their own, and stop scuppering opportunities that go against what they as individuals believe, and start to represent the majority of the British people. They need to grow up, show some conviction and stop calling people names. Maybe then we might be able to get somewhere.
If Labour doesn't start prioritising Britain over everything else, they won't last the whole term in the office. In fact, based on their shambolic performance, it's safe to say that they won't be elected for another decade at the very least. You'd think that with all this anger coming towards them, they'd get a grip, but no, Starmer is more tone deaf than you think. Labour lives in a delusional fantasy land, and their recent projects are proof of that.
£3 billion. That's how much Keir Starmer's Labour government has splashed so far on foreign nations, while you, the British people, are left to struggle. Pensioners are freezing, farmers are being taxed into the ground, and working families can't afford to live. Yet we're funneling billions abroad.
The amount of taxpayer money this government is wasting on useless projects is insane. Does it make any sense whatsoever to be giving billions in aid to other countries while our own is struggling? The working class Brits are barely getting by as the cost of living has shot through the roof and the living standards are getting more miserable by the day. And then, this idiotic government has the audacity to shamelessly say that there's no money in the public finances to spend.
Around £2.26 billion to Ukraine, while we scrap Royal Navy warships. $50 million for vulnerable Syrians, while our elderly shiver. $536 million to foreign farmers, while British farmers are crushed under Labour tax hikes. And while our borders remain wide open.
So today I'm announcing £84 million of new funding for projects across Africa and the Middle East.
The sheer extent of this betrayal is baffling to say the least. Think about it. They chose to freeze the pensioners, clobber the farmers, and completely ruin businesses throughout the nation. Their excuse throughout was that they're trying to save money, but what for? It turns out that the Labour Party is simply stealing money from us with their endless tax raids and funneling it into other countries while our own people and institutions are crumbling in real time.
That is your money. Money that should fund our hospitals, our schools, and energy bills. But instead, it's propping up foreign governments while Britain falls apart. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been away.
Let me be clear, the UK will not forget Sudan. Back at the end of last year, I doubled aid to 230 million, so we could reach 800,000 people.
The number one priority of any party that governs this nation should be our own people. Our institutions are a complete mess. The healthcare sector is struggling. The wait times are horrifying. Crime is shockingly high. Illegal immigration is uncontrollable. And our military doesn't have enough funding. So, ask yourself, is this how a responsible government should be spending our money? On top of that, they shamelessly keep coming back to demand more taxes under the pretense that they care about us. The Brits are refusing to be fooled by these idiots anymore because this betrayal goes much deeper.
But it's not just Sudan, is it? Lammy is jetting off to Tunisia. pledging £5 million more of your taxes to train migrants in the hope they stay put. Oh, I'm sure that'll work, David, because why wouldn't they want to come to Britain? It's not like they'll be escorted across the channel, given free housing, benefits, 4-star hotels, priority GP and dental care, and 3 hot meals a day.
Labour's grand plan to stop migration that's ruining our nation is to just throw more and more money at other countries. David Lammy, the big idiot who's supposed to handle our foreign affairs, is jetting around promising huge sums of your taxpayer money to foreign countries. Other than that, he's also making disgusting remarks about Donald Trump that might cost us way more than you think. It's as if this government is actively trying to make life as miserable as possible for us. They're turning Britain into a nightmare.
Let's take a look at Pakistan. Despite almost 300 million in aid between 2020 and 2023, a staggering 184,000 Pakistani nationals arrived in the UK in the same time. That's according to the Office of National Statistics. And get this, the number actually increased when the aid started to flow in 2019.
To nobody's surprise, Starmer's plan turned out to be a massive failure. No matter how much foreign aid they send, the immigration rates are refusing to come down, and that's because Starmer is too delusional to see the real issue here. The entire Labour Party is beating around the bush by not addressing the biggest problem that's causing such high immigration stats. We have no deterrent whatsoever to discourage these migrants from coming here illegally. In fact, this shambolic government provides them with huge benefits instead, so of course they keep coming.
Meanwhile, in my opinion, the Prime Minister has been gaslighting the nation. He stood in Downing Street and told you how bad our finances are, telling us we need to tighten our belts. And that's what we must suffer because of the phantom, unsubstantiated, multi-billion-pound black hole that we keep on hearing.
Things are worse than we ever imagined. In the first few weeks, we discovered a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
Starmer's incompetence isn't the only problem here. It's the fact that he's a compulsive liar and a total hypocrite. Sir Keir has been gaslighting and manipulating the nation since his very first speech after becoming the Prime Minister. Ask yourself, where does this £22 billion black hole go when it comes to sending foreign aid? If anything, Starmer and his cronies are the ones creating this black hole by spending way more than we should on stupid projects that do not help us in any way.
If it's so bad, how on earth can we afford all this virtue signalling? It's as clear as day to me. While you're paying record high taxes, watching your towns crumble, and you're struggling to heat your home, this government is making you pay for foreigners to have a better life. We're being taken for mugs. Does Labour clearly just hate this country?
It all comes down to the blatantly obvious fact that Labour does not care about this nation. Rachel Reeves has been robbing us dry, and this entire government is nothing more than a bunch of leeches. Every Labour minister is clobbering us while they work to serve other countries. If that isn't one of the biggest betrayals we've seen in recent times, then what is? Meanwhile, Rachel Reeves keeps whining about growth in our economy, or lack thereof. However, it's clear that she's the one who's too incompetent to do anything about it.
Yeah, it certainly is. Look, yesterday we had the Chancellor outlining her vision for growth for this country, because they are a government for growth. It is their #1 priority, despite everything we've seen so far. Are you convinced by what seems to be driving this? I mean, these massive expansion projects, things like Heathrow.
Look, I think the government is right to go for growth because we do need growth to be able to raise the funds to put our public services back on their feet. But Heathrow expansion and other airport expansion is the wrong way to go.
Labour got elected based on the promise that they will fix the economy and drive growth. So far, they have done the exact opposite of that. Our economy is plummeting and growth has completely stagnated. As usual, Starmer's pledge for growth is turning out to be a fantasy. In reality, Starmer and his cronies are too incompetent, tone deaf, and way out of their depth to deal with this problem. At this point, Labour's manifesto was a complete joke.
All of the government's own figures suggest that the amount of growth you get from it is absolutely tiny, absolutely marginal, and will take years to realise, but it will come at enormous cost, both to the climate and to those people who are living under the flight paths as well. So I think it's the wrong approach.
The things that this government is doing to fix our economy is nowhere near enough. It's too little too late because Rachel Reeves's policies have already done the damage to countless businesses. Many small businesses have been forced to close and the bigger ones are going on a layoff spree to reduce costs. Meanwhile, inflation is rising and the cost of living is steadily increasing. Whatever growth this government wants to achieve is not enough compared to the damage they've already done.
But I think there's an important point here, which is that what Rachel Reeves was talking about yesterday were very long-term projects. I mean, you mentioned Heathrow, that could be the 2040s, 2050s before anything was completed. And most of these projects, you're looking at the 2030s onwards. None of that does anything to address the fundamental problem that we've got at the moment up and down the country with businesses laying off employees because this government's come in with this huge jobs tax, which is weighing down on the economy, and a disastrous budget that has killed growth stone dead.
Rachel Reeves' projects are so far into the future that nobody is sure if our economy will even survive that long, certainly not under this shambolic government. Our economy is in desperate need of fixing, and unless Labour takes immediate actions, we might end up seeing another crash in the market. Starmer needs to get a grip or pray for a miracle because the public won't forgive this nonsense. Nobody's buying his bad inheritance excuse anymore.
But look, we left a very good inheritance for this government. We had the fastest growth in the G7. We had near record levels of employment, near record low levels of unemployment. We'd had 13 consecutive months of real wage growth, and we brought inflation down from over 11% due to the Ukraine-Russia war down to exactly 2% on target on the day of the general election. Now, this government has entirely trashed that record and trashed that inheritance.
Labour's been lying to us that they received the economy in a bad state. If anything, they were handed a stable and steadily improving country, and they messed it up horribly because of their own choices. Starmer and his gang need to be held accountable, and they know that the public is coming for them now. The entire Labour Party is in chaos as they're getting slammed from everywhere. The British public is fed up, and you can raise your voice with them by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.